you really need to have principles because the situations will change, the data will change, the dynamics will change, the people will change, the state, right? All of those things are out of your control, right? They're uncontrollable elements of this equation.
Very happy to welcome Jim Caruso. He's the CIO, Chief Innovation Officer at Elevate. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Really a pleasure to be here and excited to chat with you.
Yes, we caught up briefly at the Alley in New Orleans to sort of have a little bit of a chat to sort of find out what you've been doing, and that's sort of why I wanted to follow up. Thank you very much for Lara for helping set this up. She's done it. She always does an amazing job getting me interviews. I always start with people trying to get an understanding of how they get into the world of sports. What about yourself? How did you find your way into the world of sports?
Yeah, it was a long road, not very straightforward at all. I started my career as an entrepreneur building software companies, technology platforms, both on my own at my own startups, but also, for lack of a better term, as an entrepreneur, going into companies who had been a legacy service business and knowing that they had to pivot into technology, and was usually one of the first one or two people in those scenarios. The history of building, all of that happened outside of sports. My early career was spent in areas like education, B2B software, compliance software, and then moved in 2010 into marketing and advertising, both on the media side. I worked in 2010 at an ad network, which I like to say was a very good time to be an ad network.
Yeah.
Tons of digital inventory coming online, the ability to package up that inventory, sell it to buyers, and make a healthy profit margin was the name of the game. And we had our own technology, our own ad server, and we had to build that out. I saw the move into programmatic or digital media evolving into more of a programmatic and real-time nature. Saw that as the next wave of innovation and joined onto a trading desk, which, like the name denotes, we were trading media. We were buying and selling in hundreds of milliseconds, real time with data, driving all of those decisions. Wanted to get smarter about the other side of the business, the quote unquote other side, the creative side of the business. I primarily worked on data and media, and the two houses very much live separately and still do for the most part. So I went to a creative agency called Anomaly, which was one of the top and is still top ad agencies in the world, was their first head of product, first head of technology, built out a product stack and a technology stack, and got to learn the creative and the content side of business from some of the best. And from there, I built out our software platform to a point where it became clear it wasn't going to grow to the scale and wasn't going to seize on the opportunity that we saw if it continued to live within an agency on its own. So we spun it out and we built out that technology platform. The company was called Apollo Program, built out an agency to couple with the tech, and sold that to Stagwell in 2022, which beget me finally coming into sports at Elevate. So like I said, it wasn't going to be a short story, but that was how I finally worked my way into sports. Huge sports fan, never had the opportunity to work at a team or a league. And this was my chance to take those two things that I were passionate about, both personally and professionally, and merge those together. And that's what sparked me joining Elevate.
I mean, anyone who's listening who is in sport, knows all those steps that you went through, like the rise of digital inventory, programmatic coming in, why that was shifting, all of the changes that were happening in the social media platforms that were causing that shift and continue to cause that shift. And then you would have also been working with and seeing a lot of brands in that space that were playing in media space, but then also leveraging sports. So, I think there is a lot of, if you're in the digital space, you're always going to come across sports. But now you're at Elevate as, when I say CEO, normally that's Chief Information Officer, but you're the Chief Innovation Officer. What does that role mean?
Well, it was very purposeful. Obviously, it wasn't by accident. There's the technology component, so traditional, to your point, CTO. I get called that a lot. I get called a CIO. I get called a lot of names. At the end of the day, the reason we were fixated on that was because the ability for Elevate to continue to push the boundaries of what's possible inside and outside of sports as our business expands outside of sport was crucial to me coming here and to the value that I could help bring to the company and to the organization. How that manifested itself was actually much more broad than just tech. Hence not being bucketed into a CTO role, but really into the CIO part, which is innovating on our business model, innovating on our client channels and commercial opportunities. Yes, of course, innovating through technology and data and AI, that's the most obvious one. But I wanted to be able to have an impact across everything we were doing, not just limited to technology, but to all of our products and services.
And so as I sort of come back to, again, you sort of said you're, entrepreneurial, but a lot of your roles have been this intrapreneur, this internal entrepreneur, and sort of, again, challenging business models, challenging the way things are done. Is that something you've always done? And that's sort of real part of the core of your role now?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's central to what I'm doing. It's a very unique opportunity for me at Elevate, but as I mentioned, some other places where I've been to go into an established business. And again, I've been on both sides as a pure play, starting this company, I'm employee number one. I've got an idea. How do I create product market fit for that idea? But also doing it within a company who's got hundreds of clients, who's got years of expertise and experience built up into it, and being able to marry those two things together to not only think about how we transform and evolve, but how do we do so in a way that is purposeful, is true to why we started in the first place. And I think that's the hardest part about a lot of this. When it comes to doing it within a company, you're not, yes, innovation means new, is most often equivalent with something new, something different, but all that is built on a foundation of coming from somewhere. We all have a history of doing things and coming from a certain way of doing things or using certain technologies, and there's reasons why we think we could do it better, and that's what you have to be able to bridge those two worlds together. So that's what I'm here to focus on, and make sure that we're not pivoting in a way or evolving in a way that's not going to continue to maintain the essence of why Elevate existed and why it was created in the first place, but that also keeps us current with where the market is today, what our customers want, what they need from us, which is obviously changing in a very, very rapid pace.
So I'd like to understand some of, there's a lot of people who work, in roles and have some of that entrepreneurial spirit, and sometimes it might be called, being a change agent or something internally. How do you, I guess, what's the advice you give to someone that says, I want to change things, I want to change things up, or I want to see this change internally? How do you go about it? How do you, because you've got to get buy-in, maybe one or two levels above. How do you go about pitching that change?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one that, to your point, is universal. I've been challenged with that everywhere I've been at any level of the organization. I obviously wasn't always at this level early on in my career. What I found is you really need to have principles, because the situations will change, the data will change, the dynamics will change, the people will change, the state, right? All of those things are out of your control, right? They're uncontrollable elements of this equation. When you have certain principles around entrepreneurship, around innovation, around change, some of the terminology used as well, you can apply those principles throughout any of those situations, regardless of what variables change. And so for me, it's been one of those has been solving a business challenge, solving a business problem, not just building technology, not just instituting new things for the sake of change. I have a better way of doing it. I bet you 20 other people think they have better ways of doing it too, right? It's very hard to pinpoint what's right or wrong. When you start with what is a core thing that we're struggling with? Are we struggling to get better margins? Are we struggling to generate more revenue? What are those business problems that aren't being solved? And you orbit your focus and time and energy on solving those. That to me leads to a lot of opportunity.
That to me, that's also true innovation, because a lot of times innovation gets wrapped up in here's the latest bright and shiny, and like, hey, we want to be doing something to be seen to be doing something. But if it's not, like you said, going back to solving a core problem, then it's really just, something distracting, and it's more performative innovation than actual innovation.
Yeah, which has a role too, right? And I try to be very purposeful splitting those things out. There's going to be, I don't love the word failure, and that's like a very part of the vernacular now, fail fast, I ascribe it more to learning. I'm always learning something, and I'm going to learn if something worked, if it worked how we intended it to, if we didn't. And it's why I try to use more scientific words like hypothesis, right? A hypothesis that's true or false. It's not a failure, right? It's we thought this was going to happen. It didn't. Why? Why not? What could be done differently? Why didn't we think of that before? Was there a reason why we made a decision to do it this way versus this other way, which led to this outcome? There's so many layers to this of trying to understand where that and how that process works, and the ability to accept that it's not going to be a straight line, but it is going to be this very iterative learning and recycle and repeat is really, I think, what you have to, another one of those principles that you have to hold on to, because it's not going to be, hey, I came up with this great idea. It's very rarely does that happen on the first try in a clean line.
So the first bit is, we've sort of been talking about, I guess, changing in mindset and changing in process and looking for improvements, which again, don't need to be technical, don't need new tech rolled out to be able to do that. But then there is that side of, the tech space, especially with AI is changing so quickly. What was your sort of, coming into Elevate and then looking at what they're doing and saying, hey, what can we do to take advantage of this opportunity?
It's a great point. I always go back to one of the examples early on in my career, and then we'll get to the AI bit. I was working in a test prep, so preparing people for standardized testing, and we had these systems, and there were problems I started solving with spreadsheets, right? I wasn't building software, I wasn't building technology. I was sitting there going, this function could be done so much better if we automated this. And because I wasn't, a coder or developer at the time, I'd stopped doing that after college. I said, I could solve this with spreadsheets and we can make this system better and more efficient, right? So it doesn't need to be, oh, I'm not technical, I don't know. Innovation can happen anywhere. To your point, change can happen anywhere. It doesn't have to be limited to technology. Numerous of the examples of that. But to get to the Elevate page, when I got here, I took a step back and said, before we start even thinking about AI, which quite frankly, I started here a little over 2 years ago. Even if I had been doing that first, it wouldn't have mattered. It's changed so much in 24 months, let alone 24 hours, that it was, almost it would have been irrelevant anyway. But I started with going back to what is it that we need to do from a data standpoint? Because how I like to think of it on a continuum of getting all the access to information and data to making that information and data usable. You have to have both sides, but if you don't have the right data, then no matter how great your AI is, it's not going to give you any relevant information. It's going to be giving you nonsense answers. So we started out to ground ourselves in collecting data from fans, brands, and properties and putting that into one platform, cleaning it, connecting it, getting it to a place where then we could start to dream up, well, how do we make this usable? It's not going to be usable for the same person in the same way, depending on what job you have, what role you have, what team you work for, so on and so forth. And that was the first step. The second step was to build out technology to power and harness the value that's unlocked within that data. And then what AI has done and how I think about it is it's the last mile. It truly is the last step to saying, hey, for years we were told, big data, you have to have the most data, I have to hoard my data, you have your data, and everyone did that, but they realized very quickly that it became incredibly cumbersome to the point of almost sometimes being not valuable at all to have all that data if it wasn't actionable and accessible. And most people aren't web developers, they're not data scientists, they're not going to sit there and write complicated data queries and hope that they could take advantage of all this data that we have and make it valuable. AI is that last mile that, goes from, hey, I've got a dashboard or a bunch of charts that I as a human need to make sense of, and I need to try to process as much data as I can put on a browser, right, or a mobile phone in front of me, to I've got exponentially more data than that. And now all I need to do is ask a question and I can get back an answer that will help me decipher all that data I can't see behind the scenes into a very distinct, simple, clear answer.
I mean, because that's the thing. I feel like there was 10 years where we sort of went through the big data era. Everyone just went, oh, we've got to collect all our data. But then there was a little, well, what do we do? There was that overwhelm of, I've got all the data. And then you're right. You had to then hire the right people to be able to mine that data, to find some insights, whether it's a ticketing list that is more, has a high propensity to buy, or here's high value customers that are engaging with us that we haven't really engaged with. And it was a lot of, effectively, you get the right person, you would get lots of great insights, but it was still relatively skill based and resource based for an industry overall that struggles to get the right resources or have the right people to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's acutely accurate what you're saying in sports. It's also outside of sports. No matter how big of an organization or how small, you as a business person have hundreds of things you're trying to get done and all these questions you're trying to get answered and information you're trying to get to the people. And you're only as good as the data that you've got. And for far too long, to your point, the ability to have all the data wasn't the issue. It was how do I get it fast enough and in a form that's actually usable enough for me, which is very different than you versus someone else. And you think about all the different functions of a department or a team and the different departments within it. Person in finance needs data in a very different way and than someone in ticketing.
So, I mean, initially that first piece, because you're, looking at, that 30,000 foot view of all the data and making sure you're getting the right data in, then I'm a former geek. I was a former developer, coder and designer. Like that architecture piece is really important because you can't decide how all of these different users and use cases will be required. And, and you're also trying to future-proof it. You're like, you don't know what will be needed. But getting that data architecture right as far as, one, getting the data in, but then, getting it housed in the right manner so it could be accessed by the right things. Was that, I guess, the first bit, which, that's none of that's new tech. That's just good structure, I guess, that comes from your, experience being in building products, having them scalable, all of those kind of things.
Yeah, that's right. There's no right answer. But again, it's one of those things where you also are trying to do that in a way where we're answering specific business problems. We have the advantage, as I kind of alluded to at Elevate, of having dozens, probably hundreds of clients, right, that we could draw on and say, these were the things they were looking for that we couldn't deliver, or that we did deliver, but it was it took an exorbitant amount of time and energy to do so. What exists out there? The other advantage, and I think this is very true of people, and it's why I always tell, especially people younger in their careers, there's going to become a time and a place where any experiences you've had, whether they were in, I'm not in sports, but I want to be, I said, don't focus on that. Focus on what am I learning? How can I get immersed in whatever industry or whatever sector I'm in? You are going to use that down the road. When I got to Elevate, I had not worked in ticketing. I didn't know what, right? ASP, I didn't know some of these acronyms. I felt like the same way I did 15 years ago when I got into advertising. I didn't know what a CPM was. I'm Googling what a I didn't know this terminology, right? When you boil it down, what turns out is ticketing today, when you're talking about managing primary and secondary inventory across brokers, is very similar to the work I was doing at the ad network 15 years ago. We were packaging up primary inventory. We were pricing it, reading the market, understand the market dynamics, setting floors, setting ceilings. I built, this same product 15 years ago in advertising, and then selling that and distributing it, right, to ad exchanges and to demand side platforms. Same way we're and I was able to draw on all that experience and apply it to our ticketing. So it goes back to your point of being able to do this in a way where you have to have a broad lens, because there's no one right way to do it. But what there are is best practices and certain things that we were able to do, yes, with the data. The second point I'll make is around AI, and it's another area where this is changing, because it used to be, again, I need to know SQL or some programming language to be able to know how to structure this data. And it sounds like we both had the same, some of the same experience. I remember in college doing database normalization, all the stuff.
Yep.
Right now you can tell AI, write me a code, write code to help perform a SQL function that can do X, Y, and Z. That's really powerful, Sean, right? And so it's still very important that you have your underlying technology and infrastructure and architecture set up properly, for sure. But I think it's changing the game in terms of how that's going to be manipulated and how much work can be offloaded onto AI to do that work versus developers.
Well, that was the bit that I wanted to discuss. I was lucky enough to hear the guys from OpenAI at the NBA Tech Summit, and just talking about the level of what, ChatGPT and Claude are as right now as effectively maybe a little bit more than a junior programmer if you're given them the right instructions. But like you said before, it's, in the next 6 months, 10 percentile, top 1 percentile in 12 months' time. It really accelerates the opportunities from a development point of view when you've got that as a development resource. You still need the right people to provide the guardrails to say, or get another agent to be writing test cases and those kind of things. But the speed of development, like you said, if you'd had started this project, 2 years ago, like the tools that you've now got, with AI assisted development and all the plugins that happen, like it's just so much quicker from a development point of view.
Yeah, it's speed and it's knowledge. I think when people talk about AI and you talk in these very abstract terms, large language model, how large? They're massive. Data, how much data? Terabytes of data. You read these statistics. OpenAI was trained on as much data or the equivalent amount of data that it would have taken someone 100,000 years to read. These numbers are very, very, very hard to comprehend as a human when you're talking in those extremes. And I think that's where people sometimes forget that there is absolutely what you were saying, the human element of, even if I ask AI to do this, how can I interpret? The power of that, though, is exponential. And what I mean by that is the power for me to go to you and say, hey, Sean, how have you done this before? You tell me. And then I say, okay, I think that's a good idea. Or I'm going to take part of what you said and part of what I know and put that together. That's two people, right? You go and you say, AI, can you help, using a bot, whatever it might be, and say, hey, can you tell me how you would go about programming this? It's drawing on 200 million developers who've done that, right? Like some ridiculous amount in terms of, and then it's telling you, and then you still have to do what I would have done if it was just the two of us, right? But you're drawing from such a vast wealth of insight and experience that humans just simply can't do on their own.
And it must, I know it excites me, but it must excite you, especially as that, entrepreneur. Hey, I want to make change, that learn lessons fast, if we're not saying fail fast, because you can pop up a new interface, a new way to build it and go, oh, here's a minimum viable product. And it's built in 2 days and it's like 80% there. And then you can put it to someone internally or a client client and say, is this what you wanted? Did you want this as an interface? Is this a dashboard that is useful for you? And then they go, yes. And they're like, oh, cool. Now we can put in that extra effort to polish it off and get it to the level you want. But the speed at which you can build it is amazing.
100%. One of those other things that I've learned, and I learned quite, very honestly the hard way with some of this, is I do believe in that maximum. It's very hard for people to tell you exactly what they want. And if they don't see anything, if they can't touch it, if they can't use it. And if you sit down and you ask someone to say, give me a requirement, I would like this interface to do X, Y, and Z, and you design it based on what they said, guess what? Chances are what you come back with at first, they're gonna be like, that's not what I meant at all. And you lose sight of that as a technologist, as someone who's done development, right? Because you're so immersed in it. You're like, well, how you told me these things, like that's how you would design. Like, they're like, no, I was just telling you what I thought or how I interpreted. So the ability to do what you said, to be able to turn those cycles from weeks or days to hours, right, is transformative and so incredibly helpful to the product development lifecycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're seeing so many so many new products pop up. The other piece from a data architecture point of view, and as a concern with some people in the AI space, is how do you protect your data? Like there is, we've gone through, years of data leaks, whether they be, Facebook and those kind of things in just the traditional data. But now, like you said, AI and AI models are consuming as much data as they can. And so, fan data, your fans' data, your customer data is something you want to protect. So what are some of the guardrails that you put around what you've done to sort of protect that data?
Yeah, it's a great question. The two things that we focus on are having our own data sets, unique data sets that are proprietary to Elevate, and then being able to develop on top of those. So we're not just reliant on whatever's out there. The other is obviously being very careful and constructing the right setup for us to use these models. And so when I talk about us using AI and training, we want to really be able to take in the data that we're using and layer it on top of an LLM and train that LLM and have that self-contained within our ecosystem. Can we prevent everyone, from going out and using ChatGPT in the company? Like, probably not, right? But when it comes to our data sets and the ability to use it, it's quite different. And we do very much take a pride in having done all that, architected all that, and have that behind the scenes here within our own tech ecosystem, as opposed to just relying on putting our stuff out there into open models or open ecosystems.
Yeah, and that's the danger, and that's what either security officers or CTOs are trying to say. No one use these products, because someone will take a customer list and say load it into a model and ask it a question, and then that data, that's just like leaving that that data out on the internet. And so that's one of the dangers of that space, which is why you sort of need systems that provide it and policies around it to do it. So what have been some of your learnings in building out the platform?
So many. Some of the highlights, I would say, are the fact that these are very, very nascent technologies. And I think it's very easy for me and others to get excited about using those. And it goes back to one of the points I said earlier, which is no matter how much I, try, I have to continually remind myself that we need to stay grounded in how all this is going to help solve people's problems today, not in the future. And, it's easier said than done, right? Because you're looking at these things, you're, oh my God, it can do this, it can do that. This is so transformative. But at the end of the day, you're talking to a company who's within Elevate, what I mean by that is it's well established, that's got clients, that's got opportunities, and we have to make sure we're helping solve those most crucial use cases. So it's very much a prioritization, I would say, is the biggest learning. We've had to work really, really hard to prioritize, because we do have both ends of the spectrum. We have the need to service the business that we have today in a more efficient manner. And we've got people who absolutely are excited and coming to me with ideas of, hey, can we do this, Jim, and this? And I want to be able to do that. And I've got to balance both of those and be able to prioritize properly. The second is these things tend to take a lot longer, but then happen a lot faster than you think. And that's saying, I didn't come up with that, but that's one of those things that always rings true. People go, hey, this is taking forever. I can't, when are we going to get this? And how long is it much more take to build it? And then all of a sudden it clicks and it's like, oh my God, it's here. Wow. And then you start seeing things light up. And so it's these very long cycles of like patience. And then, wow, we turned this thing on. We were talking at Super Bowl. That was where we had announced some of this publicly. And since then, it's been tremendous in terms of the response. But it took us 2 years to get here, right? People were going, hey, Jim, you just started. I said, no, I started 2 years ago. We just announced it now, but this doesn't get built overnight, right?
Yeah. But again, if you look at development and product cycles of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it is an exceptionally, it's exceptionally quick in it build, but then also those like that iterative and those added features that you're going to be playing around with as use cases come in is just going to be far quicker. I mean, I think we're more impatient now and we want things quicker and we want things faster. But like the development time is actually quite short comparatively if you look back, to 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah, we were ambitious. We decided to start developing 4 applications, which really are their own businesses, to be quite honest. But each of those are standalone companies or multiple. In some cases, one of our applications is taking the place of 3 standalone, applications and companies that power those applications. We were ambitious, but in terms of total time, to your point, with each of them, yeah, absolutely, was condensed. I built a lot of products, again, some similar, but in different areas, in different industries. And it took me much, much longer than it did here. Then the ability, I think, now to build on that foundation and add things is so much faster because of AI, right? Now that I've got this underlying foundation, now that I've got this data, now that I've got the real building blocks of it in place, I can iterate on it much faster. And that's exciting. That to me is exciting.
As much as you can do a lot with a little, you still need a team in place. What do you look for people in your team to really keep pushing innovation and I guess even, keep pushing you and keep pushing the product in the right direction?
It's such a balance. So I look for 2 sides of the coin, and I will obviously, not surprising to hear, like I focus much more on the, let's go out and sell this. This is new. This is how do I keep pushing and pushing and pushing forward? But that said, I still only have one perspective on that. And so I want other people who are also domain experts, and I'm hoping that they can help me and help me find and identify those use cases. And we're really lucky that we have such strong business leadership and ownership in these different functional areas. I didn't run an experience business. We have some team of people who run corporate experience. They know everything about that. You meet with them and you're like, oh my God, these are the things that you're working on. This is the challenges you have. Like, how do we solve this together? The other side is looking for people who can make sure that I'm not going too far out in front, right? That can actually solve the problems and deliver the solutions. And so, that's where I have a great team and a great foundation of people who can help to execute the things that we have built and execute on them and get those learnings and be very measured and set client expectations about these are really cool things, but they're new, they're nascent, they're untested, and these are the things that are more proven and tested. And how do we mix those 2 things together to get you what you need? And then from a tech, that's more on a service side and the strategic elements of it. But on the technology side, very similar, right? I want to do everything. I want to do it fast. I want to do it now. I have people, and the product team that I work with, and I've worked with a couple of these people for a very long time, are really good at staying grounded, making sure we're hitting deadlines, making sure we're hitting timelines, and going through the daily, paces with all that to get us to successful releases.
So you mentioned, Elevate was your first foray into the world of sports, and you've spent 2 years both learning the business, learning the industry, learning the technology and the data, and, analyzing data. That's where you come from, looking at the data. What's the data tell you? What are some of the key trends you're seeing in the sports entertainment world that, have opened your eyes up to something you didn't know, but also, now that they're starting to come to the surface, now you've got this Epic in place?
Yeah. 2 things. One, I would say I had an idea of, and it was one of the reasons I was excited to quite honestly join Elevate and build out Epic and what we're doing, which is a lot of the data and analytics. I'm a huge Moneyball fan. So that was one of the things that I gravitated to, but it's all focused on, not all, the majority of it is focused on what's happening on the field. What's happening and I understand that, right? I'm paying companies or teams are paying billions of dollars for players who want to optimize performance, optimize the on-field product, which is what their product is, right? It's what's happening in the player's performance on the field. I think there's a massive opportunity to take that from the outside, from the inside out, and also think about what's happening and how do I power performance around what's not happening in the stadium, what's outside my 4 walls. And it's no different than when I used to talk to brands and marketers about you can optimize what's happening in your ecosystem. For most often, that's your website or brick and mortar store. As much as you want. But at some point, you've got to figure out how to get people in there in the first place. It's harder to do, but it's just as, if not more important, right? But it's a hell of a lot easier to go, well, how do I optimize when someone's on my website? I'm going to do everything I can to get them to go from the homepage to the checkout, right? It's easier. You're in control of it. A lot harder to go, how do I get 1 million people who I don't know anything about to come to my site in the first place? I think it's the same thing with teams. They can measure everything down to, muscle movement. The metrics that you can do when everything's in your control in your stadium and your pitch, very different than how do we get people into the stadium in the first place.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and that is, I've discussed it a lot, that whole money ball outside the pitch, off the court. That's just as fascinating, both, getting people into the stadium, and then once they're in the stadium, what is that experience? How can you deepen that fandom? And then it comes down to what does that deepening of fandom mean? What's that revenue tweak from that? And then
That's right.
and seeing some of those changes. So like for me, I love seeing more of that data come out, because like here I am helping teams with digital and what they're doing in the fan engagement space, and it's like, hey, all of this work does relate to getting that fan from the couch or from the bar to a closer tie to the team, and it is financial reward for the team.
Yeah, and if not, that's okay too. If I'm in Premier, I have 38 matches a year. If I'm in NFL, I have 16, really 8, 9 home games a year. There's other 355 days a year, right, where these fans and these consumers are spending their time and energy. How do I tap into that? How do I leverage that? How do I use this emotional connection that is so deeply rooted with them and between my brand or my team and these consumers? How do I monetize that? To me, really, really fascinating and exciting opportunity to think much bigger than just, to your point, not just on the field, but also, yes, managing payroll, like all those places where analytics are right, like super turbocharged. Think about it more broadly outside of those areas.
You spoke about your challenge now as a challenge of prioritization, balancing things that clients now want to, a lot of cool ideas you're potentially coming up with that again will potentially solve problems. What excites you about what you're developing and what the next 12 to 18 months looks like?
What probably excites me the most is that while there are all these applications and these new things that we build are definitely additive and pushing out to other areas, we're now building on a foundation. We're not starting from scratch. We're not starting from zero. We've got this backbone now of both data, technology, and AI that we've learned and trained and built and pressure tested and sold and have paying clients using a lot of this. So for me, we're just in the beginning stages of this, but what comes next is using all those, actually a point you made earlier, right? Using all of those learnings to say, okay, well now when we go build the next 4 apps or whatever it is, you can do so in a much more intelligent, measured, and knowledgeable way.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, I really appreciate catching up again. I want to get to the Sports Geek closing 5.
Sure,
do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
First sports event I ever attended would have been a New York Jets game at the old Meadowlands Stadium, growing up about 10 minutes outside of there in New Jersey.
Terrific. And you've probably been to a bunch of sports events in your time. Do you have a favorite food memory or a go-to food at a sports event?
Go-to food is probably popcorn, just like easy snacks. Yeah.
That's all right. What's the first app you open in the morning?
Unfortunately, probably the mail app. Let's check my email. Elevate is now a global company. We have people, the sun never sets on us anymore. There's people all around the world working at Elevate. So no matter what time or time zone I'm in or when I wake up, there's something going on.
Yeah, it is a blessing and a curse when you're in a global company, and that stuff can happen for 24 hours, but also means you're getting emails at all kind of times of the night. Is there someone that you follow that they might be someone on social or an author or someone like that the podcast listeners should give a follow, and why?
One of the biggest business and technology influences in books I've read is Ben Horowitz, and he exists outside of sports. He's a venture capitalist. What those guys do and what they've done for a long time is so fascinating to me as a technologist and an entrepreneur. I don't know what he's up to these days, but I would say looking at some of his books and some of his essays are really, really compelling business learnings and about entrepreneurship for sure.
And especially that piece, sort of we talked about entrepreneurship, of the ability to assess a model or assess tech to see what changes or what, whether it's going to be a hit or a miss. I mean, they're not batting 1,000, but they have to have that thinking model to look over something, and it's that problem. Looking at the way they tackle a problem or assess something is, I find that kind of stuff fascinating as well.
Yeah, no, listen, no one's gonna, to your point, bat whatever saying you want to use, bat 1,000, whatever, right? Like you're gonna hear a lot more no's than yes, like all of the sayings, right? But they're all true, and you have to have the ability to stick with it, and the ability not to give up is probably one of the biggest assets you can have as you're thinking about, to your point, any form of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. The last question I always ask people is, what social media platform is your MVP?
I am not on social media. I don't have a Facebook account. I pretty much stay off of it. So I would say nothing along those lines as it relates to social, but I will spend a lot of time on like a Duolingo. I'm trying to learn brush up on my
Yep.
Italian and get better there. So that's the closest it comes to social media, I guess.
That's all right. What's your streak at?
Pretty good. I think I'm up to like 200 and something days.
There you go.
I'm committed. I'm all in. I'm committed
Yeah,
to it.
exactly. There you go. Gamification works. We
That's right.
see it in
It
action.
does. That leaderboard makes you motivated. That and the Peloton, between those two are good ways to keep me going.
No, exactly. Well, Jim, thank you very much for coming on the pod. If people do want to reach out to you, ask other questions, say thank you for what they've learned, what is the best way to do so? Is it LinkedIn, or is it what other ways can people reach out to you?
LinkedIn, or email me, jim@oneelevate.com. Happy to answer, chat on anything at all.
Thanks very much, and hopefully I catch up with you soon when I'm next in the US.
That'd be great. Thanks again, Sean. Really appreciate your time.